Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man. He'll unpack wisdom and insights from a cross-section of top quality performers in business, media, sports, entertainment, and lifestyle to uncover key elements to help you live your best audacious life ever. So without further ado, here is the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations of Audley Stevenson, and it's a pleasure to be here as we continue another episode of the most audacious podcast on the internet. This is the Audacious Living Podcast, and I want to thank you, as always, for being here, spending some time with us on our journey as we continue our ongoing goal of helping you live your best audacious life ever. As always, I encourage you to connect with us through our social media channels. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram under the handle The Audacious Pod. And if you head over to Facebook, you can join our community simply by typing in the Audacious Living Podcast in the search engine, and you'll be connected. And then lastly, of course, our YouTube channel. We're quite active on YouTube. In fact, if you're watching this episode on YouTube, then you already know that all you've got to do is subscribe by tapping the bell down below, and you're part of the community as well there too. So we got you covered on all bases, and I'd encourage you to like, follow, subscribe, share, tell a friend, tweet it, however you get the word out. Let's do it, and let's keep this audacious conversation moving. Now, pandemic or not, we are constantly needing and learning how to pivot. Whether it's in our personal life, our business, or our relationship, things are constantly changing. And these days, we're truly in the midst of a unique set of circumstances where the ability to pivot has never been more important than it is right now, thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic. One of those important things to understand when it comes to the pivot is to understand what it's not. People often attribute it to failure when it's not about failing. In its simplest forms, it's the ability to respond to changes without missing a beat or allowing ourselves to be sidetracked from the main goal or our purpose. Our guest on this edition of the podcast is Adam Markel, and he'll definitely broaden our understanding of what it means to pivot in our lives and the things that we can do to build up our level of resilience to be able to handle the changes that come our way. And believe me, they do come. Adam is a recognized expert in professional and personal reinvention, and he's also the host of his own podcast. He's got the Conscious Pivot podcast. It's always great to have to exchange dialogue with fellow podcasters as well. And much like the Audacious Living podcast, he engages in powerful dialogue with insightful people to really build and strengthen our levels of resiliency. He guides individuals and businesses to capitalize on change and magnify their impact. He's the author of the Wall Street best-selling book. You might have heard of it, The Art and Science of a Pivot. He's got a new one coming out called Change Proof, which you'll also hear all about in a few moments. The spirited conversation, lots of great insights. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Adam Markel. Enjoy. Adam, I just want to get started. Listen, I really appreciate you being here. This is the Audacious Living Podcast, and we spend so much time talking about the importance of just being bold and courageous and being audacious. And certainly I see a strong connection to resiliency in your work. So it makes sense for you to be here, and I'm glad you're here. So thank you for taking the time.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
For sure. Change Proof there. Why don't you talk about your shirt? You got my attention with your t-shirt there. Change Proof. What's that all about?
First of all, I love wearing things on my t-shirt. Like I have shirts that say "Got Your Back." I have a shirt that says I have many shirts that say "I love my life," which we might talk about today too. I have a shirt that says "I am resilient." So Change Proof is actually the latest book that I have coming out later this year. Yeah. McGraw-Hill is publishing a book called Change Proof.
Wonderful.
And the subtitle maybe explains it a little more: leveraging the power of uncertainty to build long-term resilience. So this concept of change proof is really how it is that we leverage change for our personal growth and our professional growth, the growth of our organizations, our teams, et cetera.
Yeah, the piece around uncertainty, Adam, is a big one, because that drives so much. And sometimes our decisions, because we're not sure of that, we're in that period of uncertainty, it drives a lot of our decisions. So I'm glad you touched on that.
I think it's fear is at the root of everybody's pain. I mean, there's always
well put.
Go to the first so the first domino, if you will, and it's always gonna be rooted in in some form of fear. And I think it's probably more than anything else, if you learn how to resolve fear in your world, and coexist with it, and and be recognizing and be aware of just how it impacts our decision making. I think it's really important, very important.
I think coexist is a great word, because what that really says is that it's going to be there. We can't make it suddenly vanish. We can't make it disappear. It's a human function, right? But it really comes down to, when the fear arrives, what do you do, right? That's the next step.
Yeah, it's mindset on some level. So in my work these days, I do a lot of keynote speaking for organizations, and we talk about how to create change-proof leadership. How do you create change-proof cultures? And those are cultures that really embrace the things that are unknown.
Gotcha.
They embrace uncertainty, as opposed to what is much more the norm, or what's more prevalent, is to resist what we don't know.
Right.
Because again, the unknown is the greatest producer of fear.
Gotcha.
And the greatest fear, I would say, is the fear of the unknown.
There you go. Yeah.
People are afraid. They have fear of success. They have fear of failure and all that kind of stuff. But really, it's the fear of the space of not knowing. That's
what we don't know will happen. What might not happen is what we're really concerned with. And I get it. Absolutely.
Because that's where our own sort of preconditioned minds, fear-based, the limbic aspects of our brains, the way our brains operate and function so often just out of reaction to things, in fight, flight, freeze mode, as people know it well these days. But that really is an area where if we're not in a state of awareness of that, it's very difficult to control that.
Right.
And that is an area we can control.
Yeah. Well, and we like to control things, right, Adam? We like to have control. We like to know what's coming around the corner. So there's some people, when they're reading a book, they flip to the end because they want to know what's going to happen. They read spoilers. They want to control. They want to know. And so when you don't have that ability to know what the outcome is, it's for some people, it's really difficult to handle.
Well, it shuts down the process for innovation. It shuts down the process for improvisation. I wrote a book some years ago called Pivot. That's a book that a lot of people are, probably more familiar with, since the new book Change Proof is not out yet. But this book, Pivot, is really very much about this idea of how it is that you navigate, those situations where, where you're, you've got multiple options, let's say.
Yes. Absolutely.
And so it's, I think right now, so many people are in their own personal pivot or in their professional pivot as well.
Yes.
And for each of us to be in that place, to recognize, I think first and foremost, that a pivot is not an unusual thing.
No.
It's in fact, it's really more the norm than it is the exception to the norm.
Right.
So to going, this concept that people like to say today, that I want to just get back to normal, right? We sort of call that into question, push back on that a bit, I suppose, because there's no getting back to anything.
That's right.
There's nothing to get back to. There's no normal to restore. This is the new normal. It's the now normal. And what is next is what we're wanting to be, have some element of control over. And that is not a concept of bouncing back, but bouncing forward. It's a concept of how it is that you leverage exactly what's happening right now, the sort of ever-present pivot that we and our organizations are in, and use that as a catalyst for what's actually going to happen next.
Well, the norm for a lot of people is just what's comfortable, right? It's what they know, what they're familiar with. It's not that and you're absolutely right. We are in the new normal, but to think it's still, precarious because I don't know exactly what a new normal looks like. I just want the comfortable because I did that for a long time. It worked for me, right?
Yep. You know what? If you think that somehow or another any form of change is one that will cause pain, for example, if you associate pain with change, you're always going to be resistant to change.
Gotcha.
When you see change as something that's good, I love the Japanese term Kaizen for that purpose, because it literally translates into Kaizen is change good. Now you think about that. Ram Dass said years ago that we've got to make friends with change. I would even say that you have to make best friends with change, because change is the ever-present thing. That's why the book and the concept that we're talking about these days is really about how it is that you become agnostic to change. Meaning change is not any sort of a deviation from the quote norm. It is the norm.
It's the norm. That's right.
Yeah, it is the norm. And that way, when you're not reactive to change, or you're not resistant to change, you're not in fear of change, it opens up more possibilities than almost anything.
Yeah.
Because it's limitless. When you think things have to be a certain way, whether it's for your level of comfort, or it's for your the control freak in your mind that says, I gotta know and I gotta have certainty, etc. You cut down the possibilities to a very finite number, when what is true is that the possibilities for things working out very well, exceedingly well, and well beyond your ability to have predicted even.
Right.
Those possibilities are quite infinite.
Well, I love what you talked about, the innovation and improvisation, right? Those are two key skills in our just everyday. I think everyone should master those two things at least to move through this world, and we don't have that opportunity. So I think I'm really glad you mentioned that, because they're critical to just our everyday existence, I believe.
They are. It's I mean, if you're gonna help your kids or help someone who's just getting started, let's say in the business, in business life, or as an employee in working in someone else's business, that ability to change your course, to pivot, let's say, I'll use that word self-servingly, but to improvise is going to be vital. It may be the most important skill, other than actually developing resilience. And that's the heart of our work today, is how it is that we can help individuals become more resilient. Ultimately, that when organizations themselves are baking resilience into the culture, you have healthy people working, because most people spend the bulk of their time working. Exactly. And because our corporate structure is still so is still so prevalent, so many people work in a large, some companies, in some business, and if that company is burning them out, if the culture of that company is exhausting them, ultimately they're going to be unhappy. Ultimately, they're going to be less productive. Ultimately, they'll be less engaged. Ultimately, they'll leave.
That's right.
They will. The bottom line, it's bad for business for sure. But on an individual level, it's also it's depleting.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be that way.
Yep. You're right. You're absolutely
So
right.
I think it's our goal is that we are helping to build a more resilient world, one individual at a time, one organization at a time. We have a pretty neat tool that we've developed called the resilience assessment.
Yeah.
And I'm happy that it's a free tool. There's nothing, we're not offering anything. There's nothing being sold. But your folks can go to resiliencerank.com. Anybody that would love to go to resiliencerank.com, you can, in 3 minutes, take a quick survey. It's 16 questions. It'll take you as I said, 2 to 3 minutes to quickly answer, and you will get an immediate response with a particular score that's based on 4 different areas. So meaning we're resilient. A lot of people think of resilience. They think of this concept of bouncing back when we know that resilience is really about how we bounce forward. They think about resilience as endurance, almost the way, you think of, I don't know, Rocky, like Rocky Balboa from the very first of the Rocky movies.
Sure, everyone remembers that.
1975, right? Rocky is the master of taking the punch, taking the hit, and then getting back up, right?
That's right.
Guy just every single time he gets back up. And it's interesting because at the end of that fight, he's all banged up. And as my old buddies from Jersey would say, he don't look too good,
And he won.
But he's won our hearts, right? Hasn't he?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I mean, he's really won our hearts, but he loses the fight.
That's right.
And I think for so many people, they think about resilience is that ability to just continue forward. Even though you keep getting hit, but you continue forward. You keep taking the hits and going forward. And that's not what resilience actually is. That's a model for burnout.
Okay.
Resilience is mental, it's emotional, it's physical, yes, as well, and it's spiritual. So when folks, if they choose to take that assessment, what they'll find is that they'll get a score that's not one thing. It's actually built into 4 different areas. Yep. 4 zones, resilience zones. And then ultimately the reason why anybody would want to do this is because when they get their score, they'll also find out where it is they can make improvements. And then ultimately, what are the smallest steps, the tiniest little things they can do to create some new rituals for their resilience.
Right.
So the awareness is a change, complete, miracle, really. I think it was Marianne Williamson years ago said a miracle. She defined a miracle as just a change in consciousness.
Okay.
So that's the way when I use the word miracle, that's how I think of it. That somebody that would discover, for example, that they were lacking in emotional resilience. That they knew it, they could feel it, it rang true for them, but they didn't realize it was a thing. That was a component of their resilience, and most importantly, what they could do, small things to do to actually develop greater emotional resilience, because the time to create it is now. That's the,
as opposed to when you're in it.
Right. It's easier to prevent like exhaustion or burnout in the first place.
Yes.
Than it is to recover from it afterward.
Got you. Yeah.
That makes sense to you too?
It makes total sense, right? It's almost like training, right? You're training, getting ready for what's about to come. And it makes total sense. I also love the fact that you've broken it down into those 4 different quadrants or zones, because you can clearly make the distinction which areas you're stronger in than others, right? And maybe in certain situations, the type of resilience you needed is easier to draw on because you're stronger in that area, versus others where, as you pointed out, emotionally, say hypothetically, you're weaker in.
Yeah. I don't know if you agree with this. I'm not a big believer in balance. I don't know what your opinion is about that word.
It's situational, I think. For me, it just kind of depends. Like you have too much of just one thing? Because I don't know if you ever achieve real balance. Like you're not going to get everything 50-50, but I think what you have to achieve is what's comfortable for you. And maybe what's my sense of balance is going to be very different than yours, right? Is that?
Yeah, to me, this is the problem, is that people are shooting or they seek something that is not reasonably attained. It's not just easily. I'm not interested in personally, whether it's easily obtained, there's no reasonable way to maintain balance.
Gotcha.
So I don't use the word balance, and I don't describe these 4 areas, these 4 zones of resilience as trying to create some balance between them, as you were pointing out. It's really about creating harmony.
Gotcha.
So that to recognize that you will always be sort of stronger, that your rituals for developing that resilience are stronger on the physical side and you're weaker on the mental side.
Gotcha.
Or you might be strong on the mental side, but you're really not doing well on the emotional side, or spiritual side. There's nothing wrong with that being the case. But what's important is that when you get a snapshot of it, then you can, like so many other things in life, you can just sort of rotate the crops a bit. You can reallocate like we do with our money, or in investing philosophy. We just don't constantly deplete one area without recognizing that there is that recovery that's so vital. The reset and recovery is so vital to our resilience. So I'd say that is that is one of the most important things any of us could be thinking about, because in the world that we're living in, where change is the constant, where radical change might even be the constant these days, right? We have to be less rattled. We have to be more able to be at our best and alert to what's happening in the environment.
And our perception to change, right? We have to understand how, again, change isn't a bad thing, or there's good change, as we talked about earlier. And I think that kind of helps with that unrattling. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't know that there's ever bad change. And I say that only philosophically, because clearly, the death of a loved one, or so many things you could look at as not a good change. It's really tough to look at many situations that have been the result of the pandemic and think that's good. So I'm not trying to play that card. I'm just saying, in the macro, that when you pull back the camera, and that pullback might be physically to look at it from a higher level, or it might just be the time and space that we get. I look back at the greatest changes of my life to date, and at the time they might have been challenging, and they were, for sure. But looking back at them, they were perfect. They were perfect because they produced everything necessary for the growth that was also required, and all of that growth ultimately takes me to this moment in time.
Leaving a law career, as an example, right?
Leaving a law career, becoming a CEO of another larger company, and then ultimately not seeing eye to eye with my partners, and leaving, being asked to leave that company under circumstances that were not optimal for me at the time. The having a long-standing marriage, 33 years, that's roller, like any marriage, any good relationship has its ups and its downs. Having 4 kids, and having all 4 of those kids, well, 2 still in college, but 2 that are out, 2 married, 1 that just had a baby. So I'm a poppy.
Congratulations.
These are massive, micro moments and changes in my life, but on a macro level, I go, I couldn't have been any more blessed. I can't be any more grateful in this moment I'll say to God for being here now. In this, right here, to take this breath with you, and wouldn't change any of the dominoes that preceded. Because the moment here is just as divine as I'd ever want it to be.
And that's what gratitude can do, Adam. It helps you recognize that what you have right now in this exact moment is to be appreciative of it, and you're thankful for it. And they are blessings. And I think that the process of acknowledging that is extremely important. It truly, truly is. And so to hear you say that, I think I agree with you. So thank you for touching on that. I want to go back to the piece around change, because there's a part in relation to change. I think the more comfortable we get with change, the more comfortable we are with not being reactionary. If you follow where I'm going, like
Yeah.
if you are comfortable in knowing that change is around the corner, right? You know, something's gonna happen that you may not be able, you can't see, you can't skip to the end of the book, you don't know what's happening around the corner, but the change is coming. Yeah, once you're comfortable with that, you know, you're not reacting and, you know, getting flustered or becoming emotional. It's this sense of calmness and like, okay, so now what do I do, kind of thing. Is that a great way, a good way of articulating that?
It is. I mean, it's so the central metaphor in the book Change Proof that's coming out
Yep.
is a story that actually started my TED Talk with this story about a rescue that we didn't ultimately make it when I was a lifeguard at Jones Beach,
Yes.
which is a South Shore of Long Island ocean beach, Atlantic Ocean. And we lost somebody on a particular day in the surf. We lost them in a rip current, in a rip tide that we used to call sucks. And that was when I was 19 years old. It was the first summer that I was working as a lifeguard at this particular beach. And it was a really brutal event to be a part of, to see.
Sure.
And ultimately, there's a wonderful learning that took place for us as a lifeguard crew, for me individually, that day, and working at that beach for 7 additional summers after that, right up through I went to law school. We started having kids, and I was still like taking my summers and working as a lifeguard. We never lost anybody again after that. It was one of those moments that really woke us up to the danger and just to the fact that we needed to look out for everybody in our water more carefully. Yes. And we had to look out for each other more carefully. And we had to come together as a crew, as a team. And so it's a wonderful example, really, of how it is that you can develop that resilience as a core group of people, as well as individually. I learned a lot from that. And it really informed, me, about how we can get caught in these rip currents and the living in a state of sort of being on guard or being guarded, and being in that kind of reactionary state it's not good for it's not good for your psyche. It's not good for your mental health. It's not good for your physical health. Ultimately, I ended up in an emergency room, lying on a gurney, not knowing if I was going to ever see my kids again. Right. We had 4 small kids at the time. And I was sweating profusely, and my heart beating so hard, it was felt like it was outside of my body. Wow. And a doctor ultimately giving me the word saying, listen, you didn't have a cardiac event today. It's not a heart attack you're experiencing. You're having a panic attack, buddy.
Gotcha. Wow.
You're having a moment of intense anxiety.
Mm-hmm. And were there signs, Adam? Were there any signs of that, or just kind of I guess in retrospect,
there's always signs.
The signs are always there, right? But yeah, were they noticeable? I guess
I think if I look back on it, the signs were very, very clear. Yeah. I would wake up in the morning, I'd put my feet on the floor, and the first feelings I would have at the beginning of the day were this sense of anxiousness. So the signs were there. I was having difficulty sleeping, going to sleep, getting to sleep. I sometimes would have trouble falling back asleep if I woke up in the middle of the night. And then there was this early morning sense that something was wrong.
Right.
I'm young. I got a very successful law practice. I have a healthy family, wife, 4 kids, all is well. People are looking at me and going, man, that's what success is all about. It's all cracked up to look like that. And I was grateful for everything, et cetera. But that gratitude was not a part of my practice, for one thing. I wasn't focusing or conscious of how important gratitude was. And I was waking up in the morning and feeling this dread. And ultimately it put me, on that gurney. And because I speak to a lot of audiences, I get a lot of people that come up to me, former lawyers, as well as existing people in the practice of law, accountants, engineers. I'm always in front of groups that are sort of routinely depleted. They're routinely burning the candle at lots of ends and are stressed. Yeah. And so they always will come up to me and thank me for saying out loud,
wow,
that here I was a litigation attorney. It was super successful. And yet, it's in that situation, you're so weak. I felt so weak. I was so vulnerable that the only thing that was worse to me than experiencing that was somehow sharing it with other people.
Wow.
Because I couldn't be that vulnerable in public.
Right. Well, not in that role, not in that designation. You're supposed to be strong and successful. And how can you have those vulnerabilities, right? Like that's the pervasive thought, I guess.
Exactly. And what created some of that anxiety was just this reactionary way of looking at the world, being on guard, being tense, intense, but really tense, stressed. And I worked in New York and in New Jersey in an office in Manhattan. And I remember hearing somebody once say, New Yorkers aren't stressed. They just have a lot of angst. It's like, yeah, I was pretty angsty, and angry and competitive.
Yeah.
And I think of all the things I look back on, that I'm intrigued to even share with you right now, really is that competition is so competing is depleting. I was constantly competing. And from the time I was a little kid, learned about it in sports, learned about it having a younger brother, learned about it when I went to college, and I'm sure there are people listening to this right now, maybe who are thinking to themselves, yeah, I've spent the bulk of my life competing or trying to compete with other people, whether it's family members or it's colleagues or people in your business or other people who are running, a business that's competitive to yours. And that's a tough one right now. It really is.
And you know something, there are people who are in competition with other people that they don't know they're in this competition, right? They just don't know. And that's also a tough situation to be in, because you're chasing something or after someone who's just existing. They're not thinking about you and your world, but you're so consumed with them and you're missing what's right in front of you.
You do. You miss a lot. You miss a lot. And so I'm lying on that gurney and I think to myself, geez, if God will just help me out here. And I wasn't a God guy. I wasn't religious at all. I was just thinking, just give me one more shot here. Like I just want to be okay so I can go home and I can hug my kids. That's it. That's my big ask today. And it was a big ask. It felt like a big ask. And I did. I got to go home that day and hug my kids and have that moment of, something has got to change. That put me on that's one of the early steps on my pivot path, which led to, ultimately led to writing that book. It's led to a lot of things.
Did that feel like a second chance kind of moment?
It was. I mean, I don't want to be melodramatic about it, but it felt to me at the time like I'd been given a reprieve. As I was going down a pretty tough path, I think. A doctor looked at me and he says to me, look, you're hopped up on caffeine. I've had 5-6 cups of coffee was average for me for the day kind of thing. You're not sleeping well. You're in a high stress profession and you're going all the time, 70, 80-hour weeks is, average kind of thing. He said, you got lucky today. That's the truth. People come in here, don't walk out. I've seen guys your age, they're just gone. That's it. So yeah, maybe he wanted to scare me a little bit, but I think he was just being compassionate.
Gotcha. I get it. As we talk about pivot, I think there's an important aspect of that because pivot, it's a form of change. But I think awareness is a really key aspect of this because without awareness as a starting point, that change needs to be made or a pivot needs to be made. You're really not going anywhere, right? Or you can't go anywhere to have that awareness. I want to, Adam, if you sort of talk about just just the significance of just being aware of what's happening around you.
Yeah, the book it's interesting. So with Pivot, it's broken up into two sections. It's the beliefs and then the behaviors. So my theory is you can't just start with changing your behaviors. That doesn't usually stick. That's why the resolutions that people create at the end of the year don't usually stick. You really have to go to the level of awareness.
Yes.
What do you believe? Why do you believe what you believe? Where did that come from?
Right.
Who's responsible for that kind of thing? And that's what creates clarity. So the first part of the book is about clarity. The second part of the book is about how do you get into momentum, whether it's as an entrepreneur, or as a business owner, in your personal life. But as you pointed out, you can't do that until you've got clarity, till you understand, you have greater awareness. It's like, I'm doing this with my hand because I always envision it's like you're driving and there's dirt on your windshield.
Yep.
Are you going to just keep driving around with the dirt till it gets so thick that you can't see through it? You got to clean the windshield. Mm-hmm. But people don't really actively and consciously and intentionally set out to clean the windshield. Mm-hmm. So that begs the question, what's the windshield and what do you do to clean it? What's the stuff that's on the windshield in the first place?
Yes.
And what you're saying, awareness is, that's the first domino in any form of change.
Yep.
It begins with awareness. It moves to understanding. And then ultimately you get options to adjust.
That's right. Yeah.
The options.
The pivot. Yeah. No, that's exactly it. The pivot, the recognize the options. I just sort of think it's so critical that we sort of take that time to sort of understand what's happening to us. I think for a lot of people, and you'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Adam, is they're living life. They're so busy, to make that change, to make that pivot, they got to stop what they're doing. Right. And but you can't stop because you're busy. Right. So it's that precarious sort of situation that you find yourself in.
It's the walk and chew gum dilemma, I guess. Look, I'm not a big fan of the jump ship methodology. It works for some people.
Sure. I
think, frankly, that the people that it does work for are more the outliers. They're not in the bell curve, and not that that isn't a process that's worth exploring for some folks. That's not my style.
Right.
Especially I was in the practice of law for 18 years. I ultimately transitioned out. I retired from the practice of law. I'm still a lawyer, but I just don't practice any longer. Mm-hmm. But I use my legal background, my skills there, negotiating contracts and things all the time, and work with my clients on things that sometimes will have legal consequences, et cetera. But that moving out of that profession into something radically different took 2.5 years.
Wow. See?
I was creating a plan B at the same time that I was still working my plan A.
Yeah.
And so the long story short, for people that are considering now a transition of some kind, whether it's career or it's some other area of their life, my recommendation, unless you're in a situation where you're being abused, because that to me is a jump ship moment.
Yep.
Right. Would never ever suggest to somebody they should slowly, carefully, leave an abusive relationship. But even that's delicate, very delicate, for sure. But with other things where there isn't that going on, to me, you start to build your second bridge while you maintain the first one.
Right.
And then ultimately you have to recognize that the second bridge you're building, that you're going to ultimately go use as your primary one. You'll dismantle the first one once the second one is up and running, or at least that's an option for you.
Yep.
Know that second bridge is not the permanent bridge either. Not likely.
That's a really good point. That is a really, really good point, because it could be very temporary. It may just get you to another point where you've got to build another bridge.
Yeah, where you're change proof. That you're not thinking somehow or another that this is, I can't deal with any more change. I'll deal with this one. I'm going to create my plan B for this situation. But then this one better be the one, like the permanent one.
Good luck.
You know, it's silly, right? Except that's the way we think.
Yeah.
Because we make those sort of demands.
Sure.
Create those shoulds, those musts.
It's what it's supposed to be. Yeah, this is how it's supposed to be. Yeah, that's right. Going back to those radical changes. I mean, those are the stories we hear about. The sexy, like, I told my boss I had enough and I'm out, and I walk out, and when you get outside, then what, right? You have to think about that.
Oh yeah, when I was 25 years old and I quit my job working for it's funny because this book was published by Simon and Schuster. Yep. My first job out of college was with Simon and Schuster. And I had a boss who's probably long since retired by now and all that. So, and I won't mention her by name, but she was terrible. She was terrible to me. I felt like I was being abused, and I quit. I quit like 6 months into this thing. Funny enough, right before the summer, so I could get back on the beach and continue to be a lifeguard.
There you go.
But you can quit things when you're young.
Sure.
And when there's not a lot of consequences for people, let's say, that you're responsible for. I think as you get older, and we all recognize when you have a mortgage payment or other expenses and people that rely on you, quitting is not the easiest thing to do. But staying in a situation that is not healthy for you is not an option either.
Yes.
So again, that's why I think the book Pivot is great, because it lays out some foundational steps. It lays out a sequence and an order of that you take certain things, starting with what you brought up, which is just getting more aware, but ultimately getting you to the place where you can make a decision.
Yes.
The product, the quality of our lives is equal to the quality of our decisions in our lives.
Yep. I love that.
So decision making ultimately is where you got to get to.
I'll tell you my quick pivot story, because I think it's very relevant to what we're talking about here. So here in Toronto, Canada, I work with the it's NBL Canada, National Basketball League of Canada, where Canada's I'm a basketball guy. I'm an executive in that league, and I've worked with them for 10 years and love it. And it's, it gets me charged, gets me excited. It's my thing. March of 2020, we all know what happened, right? Everything shut down, the whole world, every sports organization pulled the plug, paused. They had to stop because of what we what we experienced here. And I had this gap, Adam. I didn't know what was happening. Like, I had this gap, I had this void. I think I was probably going through even a mild depression, if you will, because there was this thing that I experienced, that I loved, that I did, that became my sense of identity, was suddenly pulled. And I had no, and there was no heads up, there was no advance warning, but I just knew I had this void. And it took me a while to sort of figure out why I was feeling lethargic and why I was feeling low energy, not really knowing. And when I kind of sort of put the pieces together, my next step was, okay, so what do I want to do to sort of get through that? Or what's the next step for me? And it led to this podcast. And this podcast very much was about me analyzing my own life. Every major success, every major accomplishment I had was on the strength of me demonstrating some form of audaciousness, being bold, taking a risk, being true to who I am. All the core aspects of this podcast. And now, almost a year later, I think this is the greatest thing that I've ever done, because of the rewarding conversations, the enlightenment, the feedback I get from listeners, from what they've gleaned from guests such as yourself that have shared their insights and knowledge. And so again, so we talk about the pivoting, there are no bad pivots, right? No. Sometimes there's necessary pivots. And I think this is an example of just that.
Gosh, you're right. I mean, you think about, I think it was 1993, and Chris Webber. Yeah. Do you remember Chris Webber?
Absolutely.
You're a basketball guy. My dad's a basketball guy.
He's got in the Hall of Fame. He's got in the Hall of Fame.
Guy.
Yeah.
What's that?
He just got in the Hall of Fame.
Just got in the Hall of Fame. But if you go back to the end of the NCAA season, which there's an NCAA championship game, and it's the Michigan Wolverines, who have the best team, I think, in the country.
Yep.
This Fab Five, these five freshmen. and I forget, were they playing North Carolina or something like that?
Tar Heels.
Playing the Tar Heels. And it's like 18 seconds left in the game. And the Wolverines are out of timeouts, and they get the ball and take it out. And Chris Webber, who's probably the best player on the court that time, certainly was the leader of that team. He has the ball. So you got it in your best player's hands.
Yep.
And, the story goes, or as you can watch it on YouTube as well, he takes the ball out and starts to dribble, and he actually walks, but he gets away with it, right? The referees didn't see him travel, and I think he knows, everybody in the whole place knows he just walked, but they didn't get a whistle. So he dribbles down the court, and he's full on, not thinking. He's not in his body, and he is panicked. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. He's panicked. And somebody, I think from the sidelines or somewhere says, call timeout, because they're running out of time.
Yeah.
And he calls timeout, but they don't have any timeouts left.
That's right.
So it's a technical foul, and game is over.
Yeah.
And he didn't pivot. He had options right then and there. That's what, so when I was thinking about the name of this book, it came from that basketball analogy of how a pivot is this ability to plant one foot and turn 360 degrees around to check, to see, to create a greater vision for yourself even. And it's not a panic. It's not something that's done because something's wrong.
Right.
It's a way to utilize what's happening to your advantage. And I think in your situation, given, and so many of us, the pandemic just changed things that we had no choice about.
Correct.
The question was, did we panic, or have we been panicking even now under that extreme pressure, like the pressure that Chris Webber was under? Or do we create more vision for ourselves? Do we do something assertively that allows us to see more of what our options are, which is what Chris Webber could have done.
Yes.
And he didn't. But the good news is, and the good, as the story goes, I'm sure he would love to go back and change that whole event.
Yep.
To see him come off the court. I think he was like, his father was hugging him and he was crying. And it's like, it's heartbreaking, right? For anybody to see, to be there for that. And yet he just got into the Hall of Fame, I think last May, so he has a full career and a successful career. And yes, it's a tough moment. And yet it led him to where he is presently. And who knows what would have happened if you go back and tinker with that. You just don't know whatever else changes as a result. And
that's right.
So, it's a good lesson for us that, when things are intense, that ability to breathe, to be in your body, to become hyper aware, alert. And then to use that analogy of the pivot to be able to see more, to create more vision for yourself, which is great vision. You would never have imagined probably that you'd be a host having these conversations, The
last thing in my mind at all. I mean, I podcasted several years ago, was something I was, familiar with, never saw myself getting back into it at this level. And it's been a blessing, and certainly an appreciation. As much as I think I'm giving, I'm also getting as well in ways that I never thought imaginable, which is part of the blessing. I want to go back to the Chris Webber story. I think it's a really good one, because the other piece on that's also very important is, life is a whole spectrum, a whole continuum, right? And that unfortunate technical mishap with the timeout, which you didn't have, that you called, that happened here, right? But your career went on, and there's all sorts of wonderful things that happened after that. So even after, in this moment where it was crushing and you're disappointed and faced, all you're probably called names and people ridiculed you because, you know, the media doesn't go easy on you, right? He experienced all that. And despite that, he's still at the end of his playing career in the Hall of Fame, the pinnacle, which every player, that's what they want, to reach that Hall of Fame level. And that's what he did. So life is a continuum, and that's a great illustration of that.
Yeah, it is. And there's a great, another illustration from a different perspective that's also recent, which is Simone Biles. You know, the sports analogies are really great for so many things, whether you're, you know, huge sports fan or you're not. But Simone Biles being in the Olympics, obviously, I think folks probably know, you know, at a certain point, she did not feel that she was right, that mentally, emotionally, physically, you know, maybe even spiritually, she was not where she wanted to be to perform. And yet the entire world was expecting her to be the best in everything she did, win the gold medals and be the best. And that's what the absolute expectation, almost nothing would have been, you know, been good enough if you didn't get there. And so Simone Biles, she chose to step back right at the beginning of the Olympics. She chose to step back, and that was so courageous.
Yes, absolutely.
It was such good modeling for people, for individuals, for people who are leaders in their families, leaders in their businesses, because she realized that she was at that moment not capable, exhausted, you know, maybe on the verge of being burned out, or maybe burned out in that moment. You know, the stress is very depleting. And so what Simone Biles did was take a step back and she allowed other people to step up.
Yes.
And those people did step up and won medals. And then a week later, when she was rested, when she had reset, been able to reset, was able to recover through her own rituals, she became, you know, she was a model of resilience, because she got back into the games. She said, I'm ready to come back. And she entered in, you know, was entered in the balance beam event, and got a bronze medal in that event, which same medal she got when she was, you know, at the Rio Olympics, you know, 5 years earlier. And that's just a beautiful, you know, sort of bookend to the Chris Webber thing, because the stress, you know, it's really difficult, if not impossible, to think strategically when you are stressed out.
Yes.
Chris Webber was the epitome of being stressed out in that moment.
Yes.
And could not make a strategic decision. So he panicked and made the wrong call. And again, that's just in the moment what occurred. You know, Simone Biles was stressed out and exhausted and everything else, and she made a different call.
Yes.
Her call was to step back.
Yes.
And my theory is that her stepping back allowed her to not have a setback.
That's correct.
Chris Webber had a setback. Yes. He's a wonderful story of overcoming that setback to end up in the Hall of Fame, as you said. Simone Biles took a step back, didn't have a setback. She was able to come back in and perform, and her team, and support her team. And I think that's what's possible now.
Yes.
You know, that if we take care of ourselves, and we are resiliently change proof, then ultimately, it's not that we don't feel stress. Stress is actually very important. It's that we are still able, because we can recover. We have recovery rituals. We're ultimately more resilient because of those rituals. Stress doesn't take us out.
Yeah, it doesn't. There's no place here for stress, because it doesn't enter.
What doesn't interfere with our ability to think strategically. It doesn't interfere with our ability to think big. It doesn't interfere with our ability to be present.
That's it.
It's not like it doesn't exist. We're going to feel stress no matter what. It's just a question of, again, is that stress at a level where, because you've not developed these rituals for being more resilient, the stress ultimately puts you in that panic or in that mode where you make a poor decision like Chris Webber did, or does the way that you handle it result in you being able to take a step back when necessary, so that you don't have to have a setback, as Simone Biles showed us.
That's a great way of putting it. A step back to avoid the setback, and it's so funny because so much opinion that felt that she had a setback because she took that step back, but it was just the exact opposite. And I think she proved that in her performance, the way she came back and delivered. So I think you're right. That's a good bookend to Chris Webber, and a great way of wrapping that up. Adam, this has been great, man. I really appreciate the dialogue, really appreciate the conversation. The insights have been fabulous. For our listeners, when's Change Proof coming out? Let's keep them up to speed here. When do they expect that, and how they can keep connected to you?
Well, they can go on Amazon and pre-order it. The book comes out officially. It'll be in stores in February,
okay.
Which is wonderful. And folks that are interested in learning more about the Change Proof work, our work as Resilience, our company does a lot of research. We offer keynotes and workshops to organizations, even some executive coaching, that kind of thing. They can go to adammarkel.com, adammarkel.com. They get all that information there. And hopefully some folks will actually take that resilience assessment.
Yeah.
They go to resiliencerank.com and get the assessment and find out, again, where are you mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, when it comes to becoming change proof.
That's a great way of increasing our awareness, right? It starts there, understanding where we're at. So I appreciate it. Adam, thank you. This has been a great, fabulous conversation. Thanks for taking the time, and congratulations on all the great work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. What a blast.
Back we are here on the podcast, and big shout out goes out to Adam. Thank you so much for stopping by the Audacious Living podcast and sharing your thoughts and your viewpoints and your knowledge. I think you did a great job in really opening up and broadening our understanding of pivoting and the importance of it, so we're able to respond better when it comes our way. And like I said off the top, pivoting is very necessary, and the better our ability to do it, the more resilient we'll be when it comes, and we can respond quicker, easier, not let us throw us off our path or our life journey. Adam left us with so much to think about, but if there's just one thing that I take from my conversation with him, it would be this. We never know what life will throw at us when we wake up each morning. The only thing that we do know is that we have to be prepared for whatever comes our way. Preparation is the first part of responding to life challenges, and the second part is actually taking action. Look, even the most successful individuals have experienced some kind of setback or have had to pivot in some way on their own individual journey to greatness. It's not always a straight line. There's ups, downs, twists, turns, and sometimes you've got to do a complete 180 to get to where you're supposed to be. But it's important to understand that these inevitable pivots are all part of the challenging journey that we call life. Hey, listen, if you haven't registered for email notifications of the podcast, please know that you can do so simply by heading over to bestaudaciouslife.com. All you've got to do is enter in your email address, and you will be immediately connected every time there's brand new content that comes out. It's just that easy, and again, it's a great way to stay connected. Now, we've come to an end of another edition of the Audacious Living podcast, and I really want to extend my thanks and appreciation to our tremendous and audacious listeners for your amazing love, kindness, and ongoing support. You've got no idea how much that is appreciated, and I say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.